soon as the schools closed back in mid-March, I knew that a lot of kids across Calgary rely on school for their main meal of the day. Whether it's the breakfast programs, lunch programs, there's a huge need in Calgary, and I know that just because I have a son, but also because I have a sister who's a school principal, and so when schools closed, I just my first concern was that there were going to be thousands of kids who were separated not only from school but from rec centers and youth clubs and churches and libraries. All those safe spaces that kids previously had access to were suddenly closed. And there are a lot of resources available to adults, but not many available to kids, and there are a lot who are on their own. So um, a couple of teachers that I know through my sister who work at Beaucraft School in Bowness, the day after schools closed, they started distributing food, whatever food they had sort of left in the school, to kids and families in their community that they knew would need it. And so they had this little pop-up every day at noon. At the same time, all the restaurants were closing. Places like the State Culinary Arts School was closing. All these facilities were closing that had tons of food. So I, just having a lot of connections in the food and hospitality industry, had chefs connecting with me and other people. I knew the Leftovers Foundation. I just have sort of connections in the not-for-profit as well, or relationships, and started being contacted about the surplus food. So the concern back then was redirecting all this surplus food. A lot of the agencies were getting bombarded with food, and I was hearing that a lot of them were running out of fridge space for some of it. So there's this instant concern to redirect food, but also to safely get food to the kids who need it. Initially, I texted my friend Paul Rogalski, who owns Rouge Restaurant in Inglewood, and was like, hey, can we open up your kitchen? And I had been talking with Brown Bagging It right off the bat, trying to figure out how to help fill that need. We ended up going and emptying out their freezer and just getting a bunch of ingredients, took them over to the Rouge kitchen, and started making lunches and distributing them through Bowness. But then we heard other communities wanted to do the same thing. And so it sort of grew. We started at Rouge. We started doing little pop-up markets out the side door at Rouge. Actually, it was really cool because we'd get these ingredients, a lot of ingredients from chefs that were not necessarily ideal for lunches or for redistributing to people who may not have the knowledge or the tools or this supporting ingredients to do something with it. The first time we tried this, we had ingredients to make risotto. So we made this huge batch of risotto, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it. We were also sending some food over to the Y, and I said, well, let's just tweet out that we'll sell it out the side door. They've got this huge side yard and these sort of open doors. So if anyone wants to buy it, the money will go back into packaging, like we were, containers and wrap and ingredients for the lunches. And so I tweeted it and posted on Instagram. It was still like a snowy day, and people came and bought the risotto. And so we started doing that every Friday. Did this little pop-up with whatever, it was like a black box competition. It was really cool. We had a bunch of chefs from SATE, Culinary Arts program, were in the kitchen. Little Truck on the Prairie, Alicia was there helping out. It was really cool. So we could only have a few in the kitchen kind of spaced out, but we would make these dishes and sell them out the side door, and that sort of provided seed money to keep the operation going. So we would get a call from the Leftovers Foundation, or from a chef, or from an oil company that had a cafeteria that fed their staff that had to close, and they'd bring all these random ingredients. So we'd have like kimchi and blueberries and like tons of tomato. Like, it was so fun. And the chefs, especially the state chefs, right? Like the instructors, they were just like, what are we going to do with this? And they'd make giant vats of super sauces or pastas. And, we'd get like some bison, and we'd get some, greens that were on the way out. So I had to use them right away. So early on, we were looking for a more sustainable way to keep people fed, because we had kitchens available. We had these empty restaurant kitchens. We had lots of people willing to volunteer, lots of chefs willing to volunteer, but who pays for all the ingredients, right? Everyone had lost their incomes. So how do we pay for the wrap and the bread and the cheese and then the fruit, all the ingredients? We were shopping almost every morning. We were at the wholesale club buying lunch ingredients, because we were sending hundreds out a day. So it was, we had to be always shopping. So we started looking into grants. Early on, the government announced $100 million in relief funds going towards hunger relief. A lot of that going to the food banks, of course, and then to other large agencies. And then some of those were doling out grants to community groups. So Second Harvest in Toronto and Breakfast Clubs of Canada were two that received a lot of money, and we're parceling it out to people who are addressing hunger in their communities. So Breakfast Clubs of Canada received a large amount from the government, but they operate in schools, and schools are closed. So we applied for a lot of grants, and ended up being connected with a team of public health docs from Alberta Health Services. And so they helped with the grant writing, because I don't know how to write a grant. I could probably figure it out, but and so we got a grant from Breakfast Clubs of Canada. That was the only one that was successful. The teachers, Tanya and Megan in Bowness, who are amazing, who spearheaded this whole lunch program. So it's now called the Bowness Food Network. And they've got teachers and parents and community members, all these volunteers distributing 200 lunches a day from they're now in a little parking lot in Bowness. So they did a GoFundMe, and they generated almost $25,000 through that as well. So that was sort of later on in the process. And so when they announced that restaurants could reopen, Rouge needed to they were mid-painting when I texted and said, can we take over your kitchen? So the house was like, there's paint and repair stuff everywhere. So they needed to get the house finished and ready to reopen. We moved over to the cookbook company, and Gail at the cookbook company, who's also amazing, said, of course, you can use the kitchen, whatever you like. And it was great, but there wasn't a lot of storage. And just the quantity that we were moving through and preparing, we didn't have enough fridge space. So ideally, the idea was to take some of these relief funds and funnel them through a restaurant kitchen or a catering kitchen that had lost all their business, and keep them afloat as well, right? Doing what they do. And I think that's a key to all this, to feeding each other, feeding our communities, is tapping into that existing infrastructure in the hospitality industry that is in danger of just completely going under. So ideally, in terms of funding, I hoped that we would generate enough funding that we could engage a kitchen like Devour. Javala had messaged me on Messenger early on, because she had just seen what was happening, and she was like, I have a kitchen, and what can we do? And I was like, that's awesome, that's great. We just need to figure out. And I knew, brown bagging was sort of sorting out how to best address this need as well. And I was applying for all these grants. I'm trying to think of like how the order of all this went. But I wanted to be able to use those funds to help keep her business afloat as well, right? It's so important. She lost all her events. She's got this amazing new kitchen. She's got a fantastic staff. So as soon as the first, grant came through, and we talked and, figured out how it would work and how many lunches and how the pickups would work. And so sometime in June, we moved the operation over, and she was able to bring a couple of her a bunch of her staff back sort of part-time. Javal and I and my sister and a group of smart women that I know, we've met a few times to come up with sort of a bigger picture solution for how to sustainably feed kids in schools, because there are a lot of organizations, and Meals on Wheels, I should say too, they have been supplying a lot of muffins and cookies and frozen meals, so we've sort of acted as a catalyst. Devour has sort of been a catalyst to send not only the lunches out but all these other meals as well. So there are, there are agencies who address that need for sure, but a lot of them rely on volunteers, corporate groups that we're not going to see anymore, seniors who don't want to volunteer anymore. So I know all of them are struggling with volunteerism. Funding is going to be a problem. So yeah, we have this idea that we're hoping to roll out sort of some pilot testing projects. One of the biggest things for me in terms of feeding kids at school is knowing how many of them don't want to be identified as kids who need a lunch. And I've heard from kids, I've heard from adults, I've never had to worry about where my next meal is going to come from. And so many people have told me that they would rather be hungry than be identified in school as the kid who needs the lunch. So the structure that we've been talking about is one that offers lunch to all kids. And those who can pay for it can afford to pay for it. I know people across Calgary would love to have the option to pay for their kids' lunch, right? Especially if they knew that money was going back to support the kids who can't afford it. So there could be, subsidized lunches for families who can't quite afford the whole fee, but I think it has to be a for-profit social enterprise in order for it to be sustainable. And that way, if you connected restaurants and catering kitchens with schools in their communities, we'd have more culturally diverse lunches. They wouldn't just be these sort of, cheap packaged snacks from Costco. We need better food and more culturally diverse food. And building those relationships between the restaurants and the schools and their communities, I think, is a big part of the solution as well. Pay attention to the needs of the people around you, in your communities, in your neighborhoods, in your work communities, in your school communities. Sometimes need is not obvious. You can't quite tell. I would suggest people support their schools, ask the teachers and the principals what they can do to support schools. Last year, we started some snack banks in schools that were just little bins that parents could bring food and to sort of supplement kids who had no lunches or no snacks or insufficient lunches. This I'm not sure what it looks like for us right now. So in order to support this sort of group, we're not sure what it's going to look like a couple weeks from now, so I can't say, but I think people can act on needs that they see in their own communities, and every little bit helps,